So my name is Jerry Mead Lucero, and I'm with PERO, Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organization. PERO is an environmental justice organization that's been here in the Pilsen neighborhood since 2004. Many of you probably are familiar with our work. We were involved in the effort to close down the coal-fired power plants here in Pilsen in a little village. That was successful. They closed down in 2012. We are also involved in the efforts to get H. Kramer cleaned up, which was a facility right across the street here from Juarez High School, a brass smelter that was the primary cause of lead emissions into the air in the neighborhood. They had a consent decree earlier this year to clean that up. They put about $3 million worth of new pollution control equipment in place, and that's been largely cleaned up now. We're also been tackling polluted soils around the community. So we've been working on a variety of environmental justice issues in the neighborhood now for over a decade. So hopefully you've heard about us and you're familiar with our work. So as you heard earlier, the alderman came to us in the summer and said, hey, this company's thinking about opening up. We'd like to get your thoughts on what you think about it. We met with the company, I think it was in August, I want to say, and heard what their proposal was, and then we started to do some own research of ourselves and try to figure out what our thoughts on this project were. And so what I'm going to be presenting, what I've been asked to present on behalf of our members, of the PERO members, is to present the concerns that PERO members have raised over the last several months as they've investigated and looked into this. So the very first thing that came to mind when we heard that a metal recycler was moving into the neighborhood, and you've already heard the company refer to this, is there is a current metal recycler that operates in the neighborhood right now by the name of Simmons Metal Management Midwest. They're located on Paulina Street, just west of Ashland, from the river to Blue Island. And this has been a place of concern for us for many years. It's a very dirty facility. They have a shredder on site, as you heard, that shreds up metal, and when it does, it leaves these big clouds of metallic dust and so on that are concerning. We've actually for several years now been trying to figure out how to get that place to be cleaned up, because there's a heavy metallic smell that you get, particularly on Ashland Avenue frequently, or if you're walking on the walking path by the Sun Times building across the river, you can smell it real heavily over there. Unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do, at least what we found with metal recyclers. They're not burning metal like the same way that the smelter is, for instance, like Kramer. So there's less regulations, less things to go after. The main thing would be opacity violations, and since they tend to run the shredder at night, the opacity violation, you have to have sunlight to actually use a device to look and see how much sunlight's coming through the dust that's being let out. Well, they tend to run the shredder at night, which makes it impossible to get an opacity reading. So we haven't really been able to the EPA hasn't been able to do much about SIMS, but it's been an ongoing concern. We hear people complain about it all the time. This is just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. This is a little video that one of our members took of SIMS a couple of years ago. So you see that it's a metal recycler, so there's piles of scrap metal throughout the facility, including in this case, there's a lot of used cars that are crushed up there. And that white smoke you're seeing, that's coming from the shredding equipment, the shredder that's on site that lets out these big clouds of dust when it's running. And this is the kind of thing that we were concerned about when we heard about the idea of a metal recycler being in the neighborhood. Here's another video too. I'll just let this run for a few minutes. To give you an idea of the kind of thing that is already existing, and the kind of thing we definitely didn't want to see more of in the community, that we were very concerned about seeing. Like I said, we've been trying to do something about SIMS for a long time, haven't had much luck. The last thing we wanted to do was to have another SIMS in the community. Again, so you see a little bit of the scrap metal there, and the shredding equipment, the shredding machine, and so on. Now, the company, as you heard, what they said to us when we met with them is that their facilities will be very different. It's going to be very state-of-the-art. It won't operate along the lines of SIMS, and so we don't have to worry about having another SIMS in the community. But several of our members, after we met with them the first time, became aware of the fact that they had current operations in the Bridgeport neighborhood, so just across the river from us. Now, I realize there's a little bit of a question. Maybe in the Q&A we can go into the details about Acme versus pure metal recycling and so on, but at least our understanding from the meeting that we had this summer was Acme was the company that was looking to open up this facility. So our members, visited the facilities that existed in Bridgeport, and what we were concerned about is what we saw in Bridgeport looked a lot like SIMS. Now, they don't have a shredder on site that does the same kind of shredding in big clouds of dust in that sense, but in terms of large piles of scrap metal outside, trucks coming in and out with scrap metal, one of the biggest things that we've heard, actually we started to reach out to we have several of our members that actually live in Bridgeport, and we also have a good relationship relationships with other people in Bridgeport and Bridgeport Alliance and other organizations in Bridgeport. And what the people in Bridgeport were starting to tell us is that one of the things that they find with this facility in particular that worries them is when they're going up and down the street, whether on bike or on the cars, there's a lot of scrap metal that seems to puncture tires and things like that. There's kind of scrap metal along the street and so on, and it's been a real nuisance for them and a real hazard. So one of the very first things that came up when we started to think about what we thought about this proposal was, the current operations to us looked to be, not much different than what we saw with Sims. Now, we mentioned the metal shredders. This is, so kind of going through the list of things that we're concerned about. The shredder is what we've had the big problem with at Sims. It does produce particulate pollution, give this foul-smelling metallic dust smell. Another thing that we've heard too, we don't notice it with Sims so much because they're a little bit away from kind of where most of the public would be walking or going. But one of the things that we've heard from other communities, we've actually been talking to people around the country, and one of the things that they've told us is that one of the big problems they have with shredders in their communities is the noise level. It's a very high noise level. And keep in mind that this place will be right here by Juarez High School, so it's going to be pretty close. It's going to be, in some ways, more closer to where there's more kind of pedestrian traffic and so on than where a Sims is currently. But the shredder isn't the only issue, and there are other issues as well. One of them is whether there's going to be automotive scrap that's going to be part of the process there, because automotive scrap involves a variety of various toxic substances that can be a problem. Particularly car batteries can be a real issue, acid in car batteries, lead, things like that. So if that's being recycled at this facility too, that becomes a concern as well. Probably the biggest concern, though, as we've talked with residents over the last couple months and as our members have thought through this and talked to different people in other communities that have shredders and talked to experts that have done research on this field, was the issue of increased truck traffic. So you see that the kind of black box there, that's kind of the area that they're planning on building. So it's along, is that correct, like along Loomis there from the river to Cermak. And we can find out more on the Q&A, but our understanding then is that obviously the truck traffic coming in and out will be along Cermak and Ashland in particular. And it's a 24/7 operation, I think. Is that, I understand correctly? No? Okay, so we'll get to the Q. But so the idea was there's going to be an increased truck traffic in the area, certainly coming in and out of the facility. And so one of the biggest concerns was the potential increase in diesel emissions in the area. Now, I mentioned earlier that Pero's had some great successes recently. We had the coal plant shut down. We had H. Kramer cleaned up. So our two biggest sources of air pollution that we had in the neighborhood in terms of point sources, static point sources, have largely been dealt with, which is great news, right? We should see a dramatic increase quality of our air because we've shut down the two biggest point source air polluters in the neighborhood, right? Or not shut down, we shut one down and cleaned one up, right? So as we've started to look into what's the next issue that we need to tackle or address when it comes to air pollution, what we've heard repeatedly from the experts is that probably the next biggest issue is going to be diesel emissions. And those come, unfortunately, not from a single point source, but a whole bunch of sources. Trucks, trains, all these other mobile sources that are adding diesel into the air in the neighborhood. And given the fact that we have the industrial corridor here and that we have the railroad tracks just north of us along the 16th Street Viaduct, we have a rail yard over at Western and 16th, the Global One rail yard. Diesel emissions are something that we're increasingly taking an interest in and looking into and concerned about in terms of the air quality of the neighborhood. Right now, Pilsen is actually not the worst in the city in terms of diesel pollution problems, but we are surrounded by areas that are have real problems. Bridgeport, just south of us, Brighton Park, are some of the highest areas for diesel pollution in the city. So, we live in an area here where we have the expressways that all intersect. You have, like I said, the rail yard and the rail lines. You have Ashland and Cermak, which are already heavily truck trafficked routes. And so the concern is what happens when you add more truck traffic to those already existing routes. Diesel exhaust is a form of air pollution that includes a variety of toxic substances, heavy metals, toxic gases, particulate pollution, which is the issue that we were dealing with when we talked about the coal plants, where there was particulate pollution that was causing the respiratory problems. This is just kind of a list of some of the items that you find in diesel pollution, the various hazards. Fine particulate matter, again, which is the stuff that we had the problem with the power plants. Nitrogen oxides, which again was one of the issues that we had with the power plants. VOCs, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. These are all things that come out of diesel emissions, and so these are all the things that we're concerned about when we're talking about increasing diesel emissions in the community. People may be familiar or have seen something similar to this, because when I did the presentation for years about the FIST plant, right, we talked about fine particulate pollution and how that damages the lungs, and people that have asthma in particular, it can cause serious complications. You can end up in the hospital. This is again what we're talking about with diesel pollution as well. In fact, what's interesting, with this image is here, just so people can't see it real clearly, that's a human hair or a grain of sand. These little particulates are so tiny that you need a microscope to see them, and that's what makes them so dangerous, because they actually get past all the body's defense mechanisms, and they get deep in the lungs, and they can cause real damage. And so what we're potentially seeing is some of the stuff that we were combating with the FIST plant could be a problem, again, if we have increased diesel traffic. This is, I think, a very interesting statistic, which is the fact that, you know, the power plants were our biggest source of particulate in the neighborhood in terms of a point source polluter, and that's why we were involved in that campaign for many years to get that cleaned up. The estimates are that, you know, around the country there's 13,000 premature deaths a year because of power plant pollution, but it's even higher if you look at diesel exhaust issues. And diesel exhaust is a lot harder to deal with. It's not one single point source, so it's a lot harder to tackle. But this is something to keep in mind when we're talking about adding to the diesel pollution sources that are already existing in our neighborhood and adding to those. According to Respiratory Health Association, which is going to be speaking later on, here in Illinois, again, diesel pollution is leading to about 20,000 asthma attacks, 680 heart attacks, and about 570 premature deaths a year. So people remember that, again, with Fisk and Crawford, we were always saying it was about 40 premature deaths a year that was attributed to those two plants. Now, this is all of Illinois. This is not just here, right in this area. But we see some of the same problems and concerns that we had for the 10 years when we fought over the coal plant could become a problem if we're dramatically increasing the amount of diesel pollution in the air in the neighborhood. And then keep in mind, of course, again, that this will be close to the high school here. So we're talking about Loomis, which is kind of kitty corner here from the high school, from Cermak going to the river. There's already been a lot of work done in this city. Some of the organizations that are going to speak later on, ELPC, Respiratory Health, have done a lot of work to try to reduce idling around schools and those kind of things because of the impact it has on kids' respiratory systems. So again, the fact that we have a potential, more diesel engine emissions right near the school is definitely a concern. So these are some of the issues that were raised by Payroll members over the last several months as we looked at what our thoughts about this project were. We wanted to present those to you today, so you have a chance to see what we've been thinking about and ask your own questions of both us and the company here. What I want to do now is there's two organizations that stepped forward. We started to reach out to a lot of groups to get their thoughts and feedback on this project, and two of them that expressed interest in coming today and just saying a few words about what concerns they might have is Respiratory Health Association and the Environmental Law and Policy Center. So I'm going to ask, Brian, you want to come up first from Respiratory Health? Stay close to this mic too, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jerry. And my organization was also involved in trying to clean up the Fisk power plant here with Jerry for well over a decade with the Environmental Law and Policy Center, Pilsen Alliance, a lot of folks, and with the cooperation of the aldermen. We wouldn't have been able to do that without everybody pulling together. My name is Brian Erbushevsky, and I'm the Director of Environmental Health Programs for Respiratory Health Association. We're founded in 1906 on the west side of Chicago, and we're focused on preventing lung disease and promoting lung health here in the Chicago area. The main reason I'm here is because, as Jerry alluded, people are concerned about a lot of things concerning this plant or this facility. And one of the big ones that a lot of people have mentioned is the increase in traffic and the diesel exhaust that might result from that. So I wanted to just lay out some information on the effects of diesel exhaust so people have an idea of what health problems it can cause. As we breathe the toxic gases and the small particles that are contained in diesel exhaust, they're drawn deep into the lungs, and those particles are about 1/30th the width of a human hair, as Jerry showed. They're small enough to penetrate deep into the lungs, where they contribute to a range of health problems. Among those are, it can irritate the eyes, nose, and throat and lungs, and can cause coughs, headaches, and lightheadedness and nausea. It can make people with allergies more susceptible to the materials to which they are allergic, such as dust or pollen. So you can think of diesel exhaust as an accelerant for allergies. Exposure to diesel exhaust also causes inflammation in the lungs, which may aggravate chronic respiratory symptoms and increase the frequency or intensity of asthma attacks. Diesel engines are a major source of fine particle pollution. The elderly and people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, asthma, and chronic heart and lung disease are especially sensitive to fine particle pollution. Numerous studies have linked elevated particle levels in the air to increase hospital admissions, emergency room visits, asthma attacks, strokes, heart attacks, and premature deaths. And because children's lungs and respiratory systems are still developing, they're also more susceptible to pollution than healthy adults, especially for fine particles. You also get gases called a gas called nitrogen dioxide out of diesel exhaust. Like any equipment that burns fuel, it's going to produce this gas. Nitrogen oxides can damage lung tissue, lower the body's resistance to respiratory infection, and worsen chronic lung diseases like asthma. They also react with other pollutants in the atmosphere to increase summertime ozone smog. More recently, in the last 2 years, there's been more activity on medical research and major studies that have come out showing the health effects of breathing diesel exhaust. And one of the most startling one is the connection it has to lung cancer and lung cancer deaths. In 2012, the U.S. diesel exhaust in minor study was released by the federal government. It was over 20 years in the making, and it looked at minors' exposure to diesel exhaust and the connection to lung cancer deaths. And what it found was that minors with the highest exposure to diesel exhaust were 3 to 5 times more likely to die from lung cancer. Non-smokers with the highest level of diesel exposure were 7 times more likely to die from lung cancer than non-smokers in the lowest exposure category. And the real earth-shattering thing here was that exposure in this study, the levels people were exposed to on the job, were on par with what people living in a typical urban environment near major sources of diesel exhaust are typically exposed to. Also in 2012, the World Health Organization, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, also announced that there was enough evidence to say diesel exhaust causes lung cancer. So in a lot of these studies, the health effects are keyed to proximities to major roadways or highways, and it's the sheer volume of vehicles that are involved. More vehicles, more exhaust, more health effects. Key point here is that the dose determines the response. The more people breathe, the greater the health impacts are. There are several studies out there that prove this point that have been done over the last 20 years, that living near major roadways is associated with more asthma attacks, more asthma hospitalizations. You see lower lung function, lower weight babies, shorter lifespans. Now, roadways have a combination of gasoline-powered cars and diesel-powered trucks. Traffic is made up of a lot of different vehicles. Each of them emit different types of pollutants, but there's also research that's been done in the Netherlands that shows that chronic respiratory symptoms are closely tied precisely to the diesel emissions, not necessarily just car emissions. There are a lot of other health effects out there that medical studies have been coming out over the last couple of years, tying diesel exhaust to diabetes, higher diabetes rates. There has been research tying diesel exhaust and traffic emissions to autism, and also women exposed to a lot of diesel exhaust tend to have lower birth weight babies. So I am not here to support or oppose this project. I just wanted to note that there are definite health impacts with diesel exhaust emissions and people's exposure to them. There are ways to drastically reduce diesel emissions. You can eliminate over 90% of the diesel exhaust that causes these health problems. We've worked a lot in Chicago to get Chicago municipal fleet vehicles cleaned up, to get them on alternative fuels. We helped pass a 3-minute idling ordinance here in Chicago to limit the amount of idling you get by trucks sitting on city streets. And we've even supported efforts to clean up the exhaust from about 40 locomotive engines that operate precisely here in the Chicago area. So there's a lot of efforts out there to reduce these emissions, these dangerous emissions. And as this project is discussed, I hope people keep that in mind and keep in mind that there are also solutions. Thank you.
I want to invite Faith from Environmental Law and Policy Center to speak for a few minutes too, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Thanks, Jerry. And my name is Faith Bugle. I'm a senior attorney with Environmental Law and Policy Center. I have worked on air quality issues in the city of Chicago for more than 12 years. Also worked with Brian and Jerry on the Fisk and Crawford power plants. And more recently, my organization has turned to diesel as one of the remaining biggest sources of air pollution in the city of Chicago after those power plants were closed down. And Jerry asked us to, Environmental Law and Policy Center, and specifically myself, to get involved to look at the diesel concerns that may be created by the pure metal recycling facility. My major concern that I wanted to bring up tonight is the fact that there is inadequate information on certain aspects of the facility, and with those uncertainties, the community does not have adequate information as to the air quality impacts, specifically from diesel pollution, that the facility would have in the neighborhood. Brian has already given a wonderful presentation on the concerns created by diesel pollution, the general health and environmental concerns. So my list of concerns is really related to where there are questions and uncertainties surrounding the facility, specifically information that needs to be provided so that we can have a better understanding of the air quality impacts. Number one, to start with, there's been a lot of comparisons with the existing SIMS facility, and what the questions that would be helpful to have answered are, how will the proposed pure metal operation compare to the SIMS operations? How will it compare in terms of size? And that would be both sort of an acreage, which I know has been partially addressed, but also in terms of size of operations. How will it compare in terms of equipment used? How will it compare in terms of the number of trips per day that would be seen in and out of the facility? And will there be any additional pollution control devices or measures that would be used at Pure Metal that are not being used at the current SIMS facility? Specifically, as to number two, we've talked a lot about diesel pollution, and one of our biggest concerns about diesel pollution is the number of diesel truck trips per day. And we would like to know how many diesel trucks would be in and out of the facility per day, how many of these are 18-wheelers, and how many of these smaller non-diesel trucks. I know a lot of the trips in and out of the North Side recycling facility are pickup trucks, small private vehicles, pickup trucks that are non-diesel. But in terms of air quality and traffic congestion, those still present a concern. So how many of those can be expected? And specifically, how many will be diverted from other city recycling facilities? I know there's an idea that there's a limited amount of metal that can be recycled, and whatever is not going to Pure Metal would be going to SIMS. But I think it would help to have more specific projections as to how many will be going to SIMS, how many will be going to Pure Metal, and how many of those will be diverted versus new. We specifically have a concern about traffic, and one of the impacts that traffic has is that where you have congestion, you end up having idling trucks stopped at traffic lights, stopped because there's a bottleneck getting into the facility. I know there's been talk that there will not be queuing on city streets. Specifically, we would like to know how was that determination made? How many trucks end up queuing outside of the SIMS facility? How are those caused by a bottleneck, or are they caused by traffic lights? Even if there's enough acreage within the facility for the trucks to all get in while they're waiting, if there are any issues with routing or lights outside of the facility, that in itself can cause congestion on the way to the facility and lead to idling on city streets. And whenever there's idling, there's unnecessary diesel pollution. We'd like to know how, whether Pure Metal has worked with the city at all in terms of planning for congestion or traffic or routing in and out of the facility, whether you've worked with the city in terms of phasing of lights and what routes would the trucks take to get to the facility. We've talked a lot about diesel trucks, but I would also like to raise issues regarding diesel equipment within the facility. Specifically, how many diesel-powered pieces of equipment will the facility use? And there we're talking about cranes, forklifts, other lift equipment, and other diesel-powered equipment, including trucks, bulldozers, dump trucks, anything of that nature, any sort of non-road diesel equipment. And if there is diesel-powered equipment within the facility, how much will be Tier 4 or manufactured after 2011 and therefore be cleaner diesel? And how much equipment within the facility will be electric as opposed to diesel? Number 5 is the buildings on the schematic or the landscaping plan. I know there are 3 buildings, A, B, and C. And my questions are what operations will take place inside of the buildings, what air pollution control devices would be on the buildings, such as filtration systems or ventilation systems, how will those limit pollution to the ambient air. I know there's one building on the facility that's a 3-sided enclosure, and we would like to know how that will affect air pollution. I know that that can limit noise, but if it is open air on one side, there would be a very limited ability of the building to reduce air pollution simply because of the open nature of one side. And let's see, I think I'm getting to the end of my list here. I would also, if the trucks are going to be queuing within the facility, again, what limitations would there be on idling while the trucks are queuing? Will they turn their engines off? Finally, I notice on the schematic, again, there's an area where barge traffic could access the facility, and the question would be, do you expect any barge traffic? How many barge trips per day? And again, what tier will the engines be? Will there be any modern engines that reduce diesel pollution? Similar to Respiratory Health Association, Environmental Law and Policy Center is not here to support or oppose. We're simply here to raise questions and concerns that need to be addressed to answer community questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And also with me is Mark Swedlow, who is with Pure Metal Recycling, and some more of the detailed questions about the equipment or facilities he can answer. But actually, thank you for the organizations and also for Pero for raising your concerns. And these are the concerns that we have been, that Pure Metal has been trying to answer over the last couple months. We have not had an opportunity to meet with the Environmental Law and Policy Center or the Respiratory Group, and we're happy to meet with you and address your concerns. A lot of your concerns we've already heard from different community groups, and we believe some of them we've addressed. And are happy to meet and try and address everything else that we can. You know, the first concern that was raised, and it was talking about, it was from Pero, and they talked about how they have been concerned in the past about how dirty the other facility is. And again, as I made my initial presentation, we plan to have a fully concreted, state-of-the-art, much cleaner facility. So we believe that we're addressing the same concerns that you have. Pero also showed a screen that had looked like some emissions going up. In the metal shredding business, that's steam that comes up. There aren't air emissions. We're happy to sit down with the Environmental Law and Policy Center to talk about that, but there aren't air emissions in the process. What you saw is steam. And again, happy to address that further with anyone. Noise was another concern that Pero raised, more talking about the existing facility down the road. Again, I did address that at the beginning. Our shredder will be fully contained, which will dramatically decrease the amount of noise. Pero also raised the issue, when you're talking about noise, about proximity to the school. where it may appear, the actual distance from where we're shredding and where Sims is shredding, we're actually further from the school than they are. And we have a diagram up there with the footage from where we're going to be shredding on our facility and where Sims is shredding. So the actual distance from the shredders to the school, we're a greater distance than Sims currently is. Some issues were raised about one of the principles, the family business, that I tried to address in the beginning, Acme, and that there could be some issues outside their existing facility in Bridgeport. That's one of the concerns that we have heard from the community. That's one of the concerns that we have addressed in conversations with community groups. I mentioned earlier that, again, and this gets to the diesel thing, which was a big issue raised, but that we're not going to have the trucks in the public right away waiting to get in. So that presents an opportunity to Pure Metal to continuously clean the streets, and we're willing to work with the community on that and have further dialogue on that issue. But it's an issue that's been raised, and it's an issue that has been heard, and an issue that we plan to address. The biggest issue, it seems, that came up in the presentations on respiratory health and on diesel fuel, and we believe that we are dramatically decreasing that. And again, happy to have further discussions with you to address it. But the reality is, as I mentioned, there is a finite amount of metal to be shredded on the south side. The base operation, the base business coming here is 25% that's coming from the family-owned business that's going down the block right now. Okay, so we've hired a traffic expert. We've worked with CDOT on the traffic flows. Our traffic expert has concluded that there will be no additional trucks. Again, there's a finite amount of business. It's going to be the same amount of trucks. It's either going down the block or it's coming here. The difference is the idling. So right now, with the existing facility, trucks sit on the public right away and they wait to go in. They don't shut off their engines. Here, and we've heard this concern from Pilsen Alliance, and we addressed it and told them that we would make sure it happens, that the staging area for the trucks will be inside, contained in our facility, and we will require them to shut their engines off. So from a respiratory health issue and from a diesel fuel issue, we will address those issues, and we believe there will be a decrease, not an increase in trucks, and a decrease in admissions. And again, happy to sit down with anyone to walk through that. And then I think you want to address some more detailed issues.
Really to address the last question that Faith brought up about the buildings themselves and the emission controls on the buildings. The facility has existing buildings that will be used for non-diesel or non-emission equipment inside the buildings. That includes a three-sided structure, which is actually all electric equipment. There will be no indoor cranes, no indoor diesel-emitting forklifts or loaders within those buildings. And any of the small equipment that is inside of the buildings is not diesel. It's all LP gas. But as Brian said, the idling issue is something that when we set out to find a piece of property that was suitable for our operation, we wanted to find an oversized property because there's many issues with a lot of the existing recycling facilities in Chicago, not just the shredding facilities, but a lot of them have grown internally to where there is no space for trucks to be within their facility. So you lose control over what the truck drivers are doing on the roads, and you end up having a housekeeping issue because all the trucks are now sitting outside for a lot longer. So it makes it much harder to keep things clean. So we went out and found a site that is probably 3 times larger than you need for a shredding facility, which allows for all of the operation, including the staging, to be within the facility. And then finally, to address the barge question, there's probably going to be anywhere from 0 to 10 barges a month, depending on where the material is going that month. The barge companies shuttle the barges in and then take them right back out down through Lamont. So I'll have to get you answers on the type of barges that they use, but it's not going to stay, the barge itself is powerless. So it's the emissions will happen when the barge company comes in with their tugboats and takes the barge out. But I'll definitely figure out the type of barges they have.
My name is Mark Kupiak. I'm an attorney also for Pier Metal, and I'd like to address some of the points you made or some of the questions you raised from a land use perspective, because I think it's important that we put this in perspective, that this particular site, and actually this whole area south of Cermak Road along the river, is what the city calls a planned manufacturing district. It's been an industrial site, as well as we could determine, for over 100 years. And the city of Chicago decided years ago that they needed to set aside certain areas of the city for heavy industry. So the city decided, for many of the reasons actually that you mentioned in your presentation, that you needed to segregate the areas and set aside an area for manufacturing and preserve that area for manufacturing, so that when some of these heavier and more intense uses came along, there was a place for them. Not next to the residential, maybe next to the river.
Because in fact, PMD have its own change to be allowed to operate. So the city is actually excluding you from operating by private units. So let's make that clear and understood.
I was talking about the city and planned manufacturing districts, and the fact that more than 20 years ago, the city set aside these planned manufacturing districts. And this area is one of those planned manufacturing districts, PMD number 11. And matter of fact, this site is sub-area A, which is the more intense part of PMD number 11. So with respect to some of the comments about trucks and diesel, I understand what you're saying, and I do appreciate that, but I just wanted to point out that for many of the uses in a heavy manufacturing district, you're going to have truck traffic. And whether this use locates here or not, this area remains PMD number 11, sub-area A, and there are a whole range of permitted uses, heavy industry, heavy manufacturing, that are allowed as permitted uses in this site, uses that would have their own truck traffic. So we're not trying to introduce heavy manufacturing to this site. It's been there for years. And I just want to put that in perspective. Whether it's us or whether it's some other manufacturing business, that's what this area is zoned for and has been zoned for many years.
I want to make sure we get a chance to ask questions. So.
Pardon?
I want to make sure people have a chance to ask
Oh,
questions.
okay, I'm sorry.
So if you're...
Did I respond to that?
Well, I'm going to pass
Okay.
the mic around, but are you done?
Okay, I guess I want to just add, in addition to that, we're at the zoning stage. We're asking for zoning approval, that the land use, this particular use is suitable at this location. I just wanted to point out that this is the first step in the process. We need to get the zoning approval to begin the process. With the recycling facility, we've got to get an operating permit from the Commissioner of the Department of Health, and he's got his own process and information that he requires, but we need a zoning stamp on the application to begin that process. And part of that Department of Public Health process, they have their own air pollution control permit, which is part of their process. But again, we can't begin that until we get the zoning approval so that we can begin. So I just want to give a little background information to kind of put this in perspective.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I want to ask a question because I think the majority of the issues involve diesel and trucks that produce that diesel. And one question I have of the company is that Ozinga on the east end of Pilsen, they've installed a natural gas station in their business. And that natural gas station has also implied that many of their trucks are being converted to natural gas. And that station is also opened up for people that are not Ozinga trucks to come and use that station. I would love, especially hearing about the impact that diesel has. If I could get more businesses in my industrial corridor, because again, this is an industrial corridor, and we don't have the kind of heavy manufacturing that we had in the 50s and the 60s, like Western Electric, ComEd. It's more light industry, but there is a lot of trucks. And so I guess my question to Pure Metal is, would you consider putting a natural gas station in this business?
Hi, so I just wanted to first raise the issue of this whole steam, which we've heard before, and we can safely say that it's not accurate. So I think that's just kind of laughable to even think that that would be an acceptable response to the obvious pollution that we videotaped. Secondly, I live in this community, I'm a member of Pero, and I also work in Humboldt Park. I'm not sure if that's the north side metal recycling facility that you talked about on, what is it, Pulaski, or I think it's a little bit more west than that, near Division. And I'm sure other people have also experienced this too. Where Sims is, I can't even run on Ashland when I go running past Zermatt. It chokes me. So when you're saying that you're gonna be somewhere further or what have you, and when I'm in Humboldt Park, West Humboldt Park, the air pollution from that facility reaches 6-7 blocks away. The metal is so thick you can taste it in your mouth. People live in these areas. So it sounds really nice. You keep saying state-of-the-art facility, industrial corridor. And I guess my question is, where is the other state-of-the-art facility where this has existed, where like there's absolutely no air pollution? And secondly, why does it have to be in this neighborhood then? Because of the 15 acres? I just don't, you're not providing any concrete examples that there would be absolutely no air pollution after we fought so hard to reduce the air pollution in this community. It's actually a slap in the face. So you have to provide concrete examples for that.
I've heard a lot about environmental issues, especially with this plant, but what I haven't heard is the social impact, because whenever a new company comes into a neighborhood, it generates not only an environmental impact, but a social impact as well. And so when you say that there's a finite amount of material that's going to be used that this plant will utilize, especially because it's on the south side, it's going to be the third plant. I just think after this is going to be a third plant. What kind of jobs will it bring to the community, and what jobs will it affect from the Sims? Because many of the Sims workers have worked there for years. They've also raised their incomes, and what happens when a new facility will come? What happens to their lives? What happens to their family? A lot of these people, this is a primary source of income, and when you move in, you ruin that source of income. On top of that, do you allow unions to be involved in your business? Do you allow people to unionize? Do you allow people to have a voice, the workers? And what are the treatments of these workers? How are the conditions? So it's not just an environmental issue that I'm concerned about, it's also the social issue of the workers, the people that live in the community, how many jobs you can bring in, how many lives you will affect. And to me, I think that's just as important as an environmental issue, and that's not what I hear being talked about.
I guess there's two more right in front here, so we'll take those. Emma and then.
Hi, first of all, I'm with Centro Sin Fronteras and also the pastor of Lincoln United Methodist Church. My question also is about the jobs, because this community, thank goodness that Pilsen still offers jobs because of all of the different industrial and all the companies that are here. And it's very important at this time in the economic crisis that exists right now that there are jobs. After meeting with and raising many of the issues that were raised here today, I was very satisfied with the answers here, because we're not talking about any more tonnage, or because it is a finite amount of metals, and it's going to be coming through a cleaner, greener facility. So, you know, it's not going to be more pollutants coming into the air. It's going to be less because they're going to be competing with the other recycling plants that exist right now, and it'll be coming through a cleaner, greener, state-of-the-art, less idling, larger space, further from the high school kind of plant. My question is the jobs. How many jobs will there be? Can we get some kind of guarantee that there will be jobs for the people that live in our communities? And, what kind of jobs those will be, what kind of pay grade that would be, et cetera. As far as I'm concerned, the project looks very good to us as a competitive site, and it makes the other plants competitive to upgrade in order to reach, the requirements. I also met with some of you earlier, and I also found out that wasn't raised here, and I think it would be important to say this particular model was bought and made in Europe, where the restrictions are much more stricter, than they are here in regards to air, noise, water, etc. So we'll be looking at whatever doesn't go into the other plants and goes into in this particular plant will be cleaner. So my question is really about jobs.
Okay, we'll take one more, and then we'll go ahead and turn it over to.
My name is Nelson. I met with Mark, Mr. Kupiec. I'm with the Pilsen Alliance, and we have been trying to do our due diligence. So a delegation from our organization has visited both shredders. We were at General Iron in the north side about 2 weeks ago, and last night we went to Sims, and so we wanted to get a real feel for what these machines look like, sound like, what kind of emissions and that kind of stuff. And I think it was very useful for us to actually see it. But I should say a few things briefly. I think one issue that we are concerned about, and we brought it up to you, is the fact that we learned about this very late, about 2 weeks before this was supposed to go into the Zoning Board of Appeals. And if it wasn't because people started asking questions, we would never have had this meeting or other meetings that we've had before, because this is allowing us to inform the community. So I appreciate that you guys have done it for a second time, in October, so that we can have a hearing in December. That's important, and this was the reason why. Now, I think that just, from our perspective, we've been trying to keep an open mind and see what the other shredders look like and what are the advantages. And the first thing that I should say, like the lady said before, from EPA, from other sources, these places emit stuff. They throw, there are emissions. What we have to be careful about is what kind of emissions these are, right? So what we feed into the machine, so that we are not getting lead and other things going into the air. But these are things that happen, and that's why these facilities use a lot of water so that they can cool off this stuff, and keep it down, keep the dust down. But that is something real. The noise is something very real. I was next to both machines. It's like a running, it's like a car race going on all the time. So it's a real concern, I think. After I went to General Iron, I had stuff in my hair for like 3 days, coming out of my hair. So obviously there's stuff coming out in the air. However, of all these things, the biggest thing, our biggest concern is the labor question. Because like when I talked to Mark the first time, they told us, and he said that this is being revised, that the jobs would pay $10 an hour. I said, $10 an hour? Wait a minute. I talked to the people at Sims. They're Teamsters. They have a contract. They start at $15 an hour. They have insurance. They have vacation. They have dental. When we met with Sims yesterday, the union steward, we asked the union steward to be at the table. He was there. They meet for safety every morning, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Why? Because these folks have the power to be a union. If these people were working in any of the other places, they would fire them if they asked one question. So my concern, really, our concern has been from the beginning, is are we Walmartizing, to use an expression, the business here? Are we competing in an unfair way with people that are paying twice as much as you might be paying? Because if that's the case, we're not talking about new jobs. We're talking about you replacing the old jobs. And that's what happened in the United States for the last 30 years. And that's why people, now are having trouble to make their homes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that those are real questions. I know that Mark is going to give us a proposal about this. We also want to see some specifics, some real drawings, because you know that state of the art, it's in the eye of the beholder. So we want to make sure that, the capturing material, and all those things are in place. And I think that that's going to be very important for people to actually make their mind about the project.
I appreciate all the questions, and a lot of those are very important topics that we've talked to both Nelson and Pero about. I'll first address the Alderman's question about the natural gas trucks. There's a lot of options out there that are starting to become much more real. Natural gas is clearly one of them. You see a lot of the Ozinga trucks around the area have the natural gas powered trucks. We would love the opportunity to be a part of that program. There's also retrofitting existing diesel trucks. That's something that a lot of companies have done, and it's something that, excuse me, like referring to the Tier 4 for the cranes, diesel trucks themselves can be retrofitted to be a little bit cleaner, to scrub the emissions so that you have a much lower emission from that truck. Another thing that we've experienced with, we've tried at Acme was the biodiesel fuel. Now that's something that is definitely still in the very early stages. It does get slightly higher mileage, which does lower the amount of fuel used, and we're happy to continue to try all these different things on our equipment and try to encourage our customers to follow the same path. As for jobs, I think that Nelson and myself have had a few conversations. I think there was miscommunication about the $10 an hour. He initially asked me what the range is, and again, we're right now, as Mr. Kupiec said, we are in the very early stages. So we're not at the point where we're taking job applications and trying to fill our staff and offering specific wages. What I can tell you is it's a very competitive business, and it's a very competitive industry, and we know that we have no intention of coming out and offering low wages, trying to undercut. That's not the way that this industry operates. There's a lot of highly skilled positions, and you can't go out and offer somebody $10 an hour to do a job that they should be getting paid $30 an hour. You won't get qualified people, you won't get good employees, and the business will fail. So obviously we would like to pay as much as we can from an idealistic standpoint, but on the same token, it's a business and we're trying to be successful, and to do that you have to start with your employees. And if you do not have good employees, there's no chance you'll be successful. So both Sims, General Iron, and a handful of other smaller to medium-sized operations throughout this city have very qualified employees, and they pay a competitive rate against each other. And I can tell you from my experience that rate is higher than minimum wage, it's higher than many other industries in our city. And most of the employees, as he referred to from Sims, from General Iron, they live a very comfortable life. They support their families, they support their communities because they're getting paid a very fair wage. So we have no intention of coming in and paying anything less than our competitors, because we need a very strong base of employees, and we would love to pull 100% local workforce. You know, one thing that's very important about the PMDs all over the city is that they were initiated to not only provide a certain area for industry to continue to thrive, but also for people to be able to live and work in the same community. You know, we don't want people to have to drive an hour just to get to work. Enough people do that already. So by being in a specific area that's earmarked for manufacturing, that's also neighboring actual residential and communities, we want to provide and help what the Alderman has done and the other neighborhood organizations have done over the last 20 years to continue to improve the area. And you do that best by having a lot of good jobs and paying a fair wage so people can stay and not have to try to move closer to their job.
Thank you. Just to address a couple of, first, on the Alderman's concern about the natural gas station, when you said it, Mark turned and said absolutely. So, you know, there's ways of retrofitting cars, but in terms of your question about would they be willing to build a natural gas station on location, the first thing you said, so that's definitely something that can be done. To the concerns about, again, emissions, those are the concerns that we are trying to address. We're not trying to slap anyone in the face. We're trying to address those. The data that we're giving you is the data that we're getting from about the equipment that we're going to be putting in. Remember, when you're talking about the facility here and the facility on the north side by Humboldt Park, again, I don't know which one you're talking about there, but what you're talking about are facilities that are 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. Although they've updated some equipment, they have some old equipment. So yeah, there are, the analogy I gave in the beginning was if you have a 100-year-old hospital, they try and clean it every day, it's still dirty. So I'm not saying that there won't be problems. We're hoping to address all the concerns that anyone has, but the reality is this is going to be a newer, cleaner, state-of-the-art facility. And the newer, cleaner, state-of-the-art facilities that have been built around the country are less dirty than a 100-year-old facility. And that's what they're trying to do here, and that's the investment that Pure Metal is willing to make in this community to do that and to provide that.
Okay, we're getting a little tight on time because we have to actually be out of here completely by 8, but I do want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask their questions answered. So again, keep your questions to a minute if you can. Who else has questions they'd like to?
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm a resident of Pilsen, and I just want to say that I'm actually very in favor of this new project. It seems like all the questions that I had were answered, and I actually have a question about Pero. I don't really know anything about Pero, and I'm wondering what your ties, I know that there are 3 other recycling plants in Pilsen, and I'd like to know what your relationship with those plants are compared to what this new project will be.
Other questions?
I was just wondering, are the former plants, the general plant and Acme, are any of those union environments? Secondly, how do you know 25% of the shreddable material you get goes to Sims? And are there any former or current employees of Acme and General currently here?
I guess I just have a concern. I do work in the metals industry, and I have a little bit of background in it. And I know it's all about economics and the bottom line. So my question is knowing the ins and outs a little bit of the industry, the main concern is the commodities price of scrap compared to the market price, published price. And I know there's been like kind of a spread or disconnect between the published price and the price you're getting on the street and the price you can sell it to a smelter. So my question is, I want to know what the financial health of the company is, and what kind of investment are you actually going to make into this place? Like, what's your capex on this new facility? Because when the metal price falls and you guys get squeezed, you got to cut costs. And I understand that when you cut costs, first thing you cut is labor. Second thing you cut is, you're going to cut back on, environmental controls or wastewater pickup. I know those things are very expensive to maintain. So, my question is, what's your financial health and what kind of, investment are you making in this property?
I actually have a couple. We've met before as well from Pilsen Alliance. And my questions are, you guys say that there will be a space for cars to be able to park so that they're able to turn off their engines. What is the space and how many cars can fit in there? Because per se, 100 cars can fit in there. What about the rest of the cars that are out on the streets or are waiting in line as well to come in. So that's my, one of the questions is the space. How big is the space for cars to be able to park? Another question is, as I mentioned before when we met, the Ashland Street is, we don't know yet if it will be reduced to one lane due to the proposed CTA. Anyway, so that's going to create a lot of traffic. If it passes through, it's going to create a lot of traffic, which in turn will also create more traffic for trucks to go into the facility. So then they are going to be forced to turn to small streets, side streets. One of them also being Loomis, which they would have to use between Ashland, runs between Ashland all the way to Archer. That is going to create a lot of more traffic, a lot of more noise for the residential area that's between Archer and right before the bridge. I don't recall the name of the street. That will create noise, that will create more traffic, which in turn will create more traffic, street maintenance, repairs, and things like that. So it'll create more traffic throughout all the streets, which again will create more pollution for the cars waiting in line, waiting at lights, waiting as well for the train to pass by, because as you know, there is a train tracks that a train operates every now and then in that area, in that street rather, on Cermak. And so cars are stopped, waiting their turn for the train to pass. So, you know, again, it'll create more traffic, more pollution. And your facility, as high-tech as it can be, will address issues within your company or within the company, but how is it going to address outside on the streets, so the trucks, cars polluting that area?
So there was one question that was directed to Pero, so I want to ask that one real quick, and then if you guys want to answer the questions about the company. So Pero doesn't have any relationship to any of the metal companies. As you heard in our presentation earlier, actually we've been very good. There's one existing facility, which is the Sims facility in Pilsen. There's ones in Bridgeport as well that I mentioned, Acme's facilities in Bridgeport, but the one in Pilsen is the Sims, and we've been very concerned about the pollution from Sims as well. We're trying to get the EPA to look into that situation. People complain to us all the time about the metallic smell they get from the Sims facility. So we definitely have no interest in supporting Sims, and we have no connections. We're an environmental justice organization, so we've been working on environmental concerns in the neighborhood for a long time. The coal plants, H. Kramer, various lead polluted soils in the neighborhood. If you want more information too, later on I can give you more information on our background, but that's who we are. So does anybody else want to respond here?
To address the Ashland traffic question, we obviously can't control what happens on Ashland. We don't know what the city's going to do with the bus route. As we've talked about, the area as a whole will have a certain amount of trucks for all the industry combined, and it's going to go to us. It's going to go to Sims. It's going to go probably more up and down Cermak. None of the trucks that we control will drive up and down Loomis. That's a commitment we've already made to zoning, because that was their largest concern regarding the traffic. But again, depending on what happens with Ashland, we're not able to obviously control or direct traffic that far away from our facility, but we can direct the traffic around Loomis and around the facility ourselves. In terms of number of trucks that fit on the property, I'll have to get some measurements for you, and we'll get you that information. Pricing, the investment that we're making is in the neighborhood of $30 million. It's obviously a very large investment, but that's what it takes to come in and start a business of this size and of this caliber. The health is very strong, and as the markets move, we're kind of at a fairly low point in the markets currently. So we're building the structure of the company to be able to be successful at these levels, with obviously room for a decrease, but hopefully for everybody it goes up a little bit. In terms of cutting costs, you can't cut the environmental costs. The EPA can inspect you at any moment. They do inspect you regularly. The city inspects you monthly. You can't just decide you're not going to spend money to continue on with your environmental safeguards. And There are both General Iron and Acme employees, former General Iron and Acme employees here today. There's some that work at Acme, there's some that will be working at Pure Metal Recycling.
So we'll do one last round of questions here. Right here.
I'm Reverend Coleman. I'm a pastor here in the community and resident for some 15 years. First, I want to thank and congratulate Harold for the kind of work that they're doing and the kind of standard that's being set for any businesses that come into this neighborhood. I think it's impressive that this kind of discussion goes on in Pilsen here in the community. We have some students here from Juarez that are part of our student youth health service corps that have been discussing some of these issues, and it's wonderful to have you guys put on this kind of show and get this kind of information, but most important to set the kind of standards that you're setting in the neighborhood, that any business that wants to come in comes in. I think some of you are old enough to remember my partner here, Art Vasquez, now passed away. But 30 years ago, when we first had the Pilsen Housing and Business Alliance, it was the precursor to the Alliance. Our main concern was how do we keep industry in Pilsen? Because we thought that a community where you can both live and work and have blue-collar jobs that are require skill and development, but don't require you to be an engineer to be able to get the job. That's what would keep this neighborhood from gentrifying. I have two churches, one in Pilsen and one in Humboldt Park. And in spite of a ferocious community effort to stop a wave of gentrification, we're losing Humboldt Park. That's a fact. And we've had big forces of gentrification on this neighborhood as well. But one of the reasons it's stabilized and being able to stay here is that we have people who can work in this neighborhood and can buy their houses and homes, and we've been able to fight it. I think that we have to welcome industry as much as we can. That's the decision that this community has made. We don't want to be a community of condominiums and high-rises. We don't mind the smell of smoke. I'd rather have the smell of smoke than the smell of where do you drink coffee? What's the place they drink? Starbucks. I'd rather have the smell of smoke than the smell of Starbucks and be able to stay in the neighborhood. So I think that's important. But it's very important also that these questions have been asked and that we set a higher standard, and this company seems willing to meet those standards. We're excited about that. We want you to be a good neighbor as well as a good employer. We have the Youth Health Service Corps here with the students, and we've been discussing them, and we kind of like you to adopt Juarez High School, even though you're farther than the other companies, you should say, but we'd like you kind of to, it's a question we're going to ask you to, we've talked over with the principal and others, we'd like you to adopt Juarez High School, not only to deal with some questions of environmental health, which by now you're certainly experts at by the time you finish this process, but also in terms of business and how a business operates and so forth. We want our young people to get that kind of understanding. We hope that you'll take the position to adopt this as a school. Thank you.
My name is Danny. I'm a medical student here at Juarez and a representative from the Youth Health Service Corps. And I just want to congratulate you guys because I really think this is a really good idea for our community. Because I'm one of the students that is really on this type of things, that's really into like recycling, thinking green, and I'm trying to help my school too. And this is something I believe in, you know. And well, one of the main questions I have is, will we, like as a student, will we be affected by you guys in any way, or as a students, can we benefit from job opportunities too? That's one of my concerns.
Hi, my name is Dorian. I live in the community, a PERO member as well. I oppose this development and the location of this company coming here very strongly. I can't think of possibly a worse industry to be located in a worse location. Pilsen is already one of the most polluted communities in the entire city, and the city of Chicago is among the most polluted cities in the nation. To place a facility where, I will grant you, let's say as soon as you get over the property line, your property is absolutely pristine and 100% of your environmental controls are working, and that, let's say that's working at 100%, and you have good, you know, hats off to you. But the fact of the matter is, every 6 minutes, you're going to have a diesel truck, or maybe a gas truck, but if it's anything like your existing facilities in Bridgeport, you're going to have a big diesel truck with dusty, half-shredded metal driving right by this school, right by the other school, Perez School, where there's already an industrial corridor where we know that the air pollution here is terrible. This is not the right place to put a facility where you are going to be adding diesel pollution to an already diesel polluted community, from the highways and the trains and the tugboats on the river. It's the wrong industry. There's lots of other much cleaner facilities that could be operating in that same space. I couldn't oppose this more. I just wanted to, I guess, ask that question that you please not come. Thank you.
My name is Sylvia, and I'm a member of Barrow. So one thing I've noticed about, you know, while listening to people's questions is, I think some people think that your project is good because it's going to outcompete other operations in the neighborhood, like you said in your statement at the beginning. But one thing that doesn't make sense to me in listening to something that somebody else said before is the way that you compete in the market is not based on your geographic location. So the way you compete in the market is with how you can sell, you know, whatever you're producing. And I don't understand how you're going to kick out of the market another, you know, metal scraping operation that's in the neighborhood if you are supposedly going to have top-of-the-art technology that I assume is a lot more costly than the technology that they have right now, at least the one that you are saying that you're going to implement. And you're going to pay wages that are way higher than the wages that they are currently paying. If those are your promises, I don't see how you can outcompete a company that operates under cost, environmental and labor costs that are much lower than the ones that you know, that I would conclude you would be facing. So it's not like a store where if the perfect competitor opens a store right next to it, people are just going to come into the store next to it. This is a complete different type of competition. So I just want to raise that question because I don't want people to get the idea that this is better because it's going to kick out worse operations in the neighborhood.
And I'll be very brief. Again, sitting next to Mark, when the question came up about whether or not they'd be willing to adopt the high school, absolutely. And thank you. And willing to work and hire students from the school, absolutely. As we've had conversations before about working with the school and a horticulture department in the landscaping area, you know, so there's definitely a willingness and a desire on behalf of the company to work with the school. Dorian, to answer your question, I don't think it was a question, but you know, the issue you raised again is the diesel emissions, and that I tried to address that earlier. You know, again, we believe that we will be reducing the diesel emissions. You can shake your head, you can disagree, but it is what it is. And in terms of answering your question, it's business 101. It's not just this industry or a store or anything else. When there's antiquated businesses out there, a newer a company comes along, and I can give you dozens of analogies of different businesses where it happens, where it's kind of the newer ideas, the more state-of-the-art, the more modern. They tend to take on the old antiquated industries, and in most cases they either tend to beat them, or they make that old antiquated industry conform to the newer ways of doing things. And it works in this, it'll work in this industry, it works in every other industry out there, whether it be a law firm or a store or whatever else. You have to keep up with the competition. And in this case here, this industry, this company, one of the reasons they want to do this business here is that their two competitors, or one competitor primarily here in Pilsen, are both old businesses, decades and decades and decades old. And so that's the competitive advantage they think they're going to have.
So, Alderman, you want to say something? We'll wrap up.
Real quick. I'd like to explain that we had a situation with the Pilsen Industrial Corridor where we had a tremendous problem with the environment and with the contamination. And a decade or so more years ago, when the TIF was first proposed, there was an issue that was being pushed, by the people that opposed it, that this was going to be gentrification. And if you look at it now, we've got an industrial corridor that has a very different type of business for the most part than what was here before. I am so happy that the respiratory group and the legal environmental group raised this issue of diesel, because that is the top, in my opinion, the top contamination going on, not just in Pilsen, but in the city. If you look at the track that's on Cermak, the railroad track, there really is one customer only that's using it. That's Colonial Brick on the east end. We've already taken the railroad track on Sangoma, and my dream is to take the track away that's on Cermak right now between Ashland and Canal. We have a green street, the first green street in the city, that's now Cermak and Blue Island. The industry that we've got right now, the biggest problem we got is the issue that these three groups raised about the diesel. We've got to look at that. I think Ozinga, I take my hat off to them, because what they did is what we've got to do for the rest of the companies in the future. If you look at, for instance, the biggest business that we've got in the corridor, the produce market. Remember the produce market on 15th Street? That was really bad as far as the contamination and the diesel that was going on there. Now, we've got a much cleaner site now in the produce market, but we still got the same problem with the diesel. I think that one of the biggest things that was raised today was the issue of diesel. That is the biggest problem we've got, and that is something I would like them to propose on what they're going to do about that, and I'll take it to the rest of the companies that are here in the industrial corridor. But with that, thank you all for coming, and that's the key point I got out of today's meeting.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, and again, make sure you've filled out the questionnaire that went around. Make sure you signed in too, but we need to clear out pretty quick now, because talking about unionized workers and being fair to them, we got people here that need to get home to their families that have been, keeping the building open for us. So we got to clear out. Thank you very much.